Hey everyone, we are going to be doing a national overview for Therodos. And I believe this is the last of the pop kill nations for me to do a national overview for. I've certainly played a lot of them on the channel. We've played Lemuria a few times, we've played Airmore a couple times. We played Asphodel and Late Age Relay, and now we have Therodos. So, Therodos is kind of interesting as a pop kill nation in that it's kind of like a living pop kill nation, and it doesn't get a ton of death path mages. So you can still get mages out of every fort, which is pretty special. I mean, Asphodel also can. You can get troops out of forts. However, as you bleed off the population, you're going to struggle to have recruitment points to continue recruiting troops. And so, yeah, it becomes a bit of a problem trying to play like a normal nation. However, as you know, we kind of invented here the one Dominion pop kill builds, which I think are very viable on Asphodel and Late Age Relay. They would also be viable on Therodos. There are problems, though, if you're going to try to play this nation like a normal nation with low dominion. And namely, one of the cool things about this is you can get coastal fort sacreds. Now, the problem with getting coastal, with trying to run a low dominion build and playing like a living nation, is that to have Dominion score 1 is going to mean you can only recruit one of these guys a turn. You could also run Dominion score 2. The problem running Dominion score 2 is going to mean that, well, you're going to have very little... Well, you're going to override your growth. And so you're still going to have reasonably significant pop kill, twice as much, in fact, as if you were Dominion score 1. And then you're left with a bit of an odd situation. You'd be mostly playing like a scales nation. And I don't think that really plays into many of your strengths, right? Like your strengths as a nation, like Asphodel has centaurs and stuff, which are pretty good. These guys, they're really not amazing. There's really nothing here exactly to write home about from a scales troop perspective. And in your capital, where you're going to be making all of your troops at the beginning, you're basically going to be forced to make coretes, or I'm not exactly sure how you say that, but these are amphibious units. In fact, these guys are not amphibious, the coastal recruits. So I don't honestly think that playing this nation as a low dominion pop kill nation, like I was advocating for Late Age Relay and for Asphodel, is viable, because really to play this nation and use the units, you really want to lean into the sacreds. And if you lean into the sacreds, you can't be low dominion, and therefore you're kind of boned. But, you know, maybe there's some balance, like Dom score 3 and a small map, you could kind of make it work. I think the way to play this nation is to lean into the pop kill, lean into all of that, and play it like a true ghost pop kill nation. Now, in addition to all the commanders and the units we get, we also get a whole host, as you can see, of free spawn units. And there's a few different types of free spawn commanders we get. We get this guy who's basically just a commander, so he's going to lead units around. We get this guy who is a researcher. Well, we don't have our scales there for some reason. Oh, well, this isn't... Normally you'll be playing with... And I'll show you another... We'll actually probably after this do a video with expansion, because expansion's not exactly trivial with Therodos. But these guys in Sloth scale, so in Sloth 3 and Magic 3, they're going to be getting a bonus of 9 to research. So... yeah, 6 and 3. So they will be at, I believe, 21 research, though we'll check that in actual game. But yeah, they're beastly at researching. So you actually should be able to research pretty quickly. In terms of the units you get, What I've done here is I've put a bunch of different types of forts. We've got like palisades, we've got second level forts and third level forts, and then whether they have like a lab only, a temple and a lab, see if any of that makes a difference. I'd read through Loggy's notes for Therodos free spawn mechanics. They're a little hard to read, and he wasn't able to understand everything in the code. So I figured testing it, as always, is usually a pretty good way to see what happens. This right here is 50 turns of free spawn in 10 Dominion. You get usually, within 10 Dominion, you get about 400 troops. So you're getting about like 8 troops a turn. And you can see we've got a pretty good mix of these peltasts who have a javelin, a spear, and a spectral shield. All of these guys are going to have usually pretty decent defense. They're all ethereal, they're all amphibious, they all have decent MR, but they also all have kind of normal human morale. So they are prone to running. Their weapons are also magic negates. So, you know, the enemy putting up anti-magic is going to majorly hurt your damage output. So that's definitely something to be, you know, a little bit concerned about. They also have cold and poison resistance. And they're also floating, so things like Earthquake aren't going to hurt you. And they have Salt vulnerability, which isn't really too much to worry about. And they have Spirit Sight, so they're going to see in the dark. But you have the Peltas, which are basically a spear throwing, like a javelin throwing variety with a shield. You have these Hoplites who don't have a javelin, but have a long spear that does a bit more damage, I believe, than the Peltas version. Yeah, it's a little bit more damage. And it's longer, so they get a repel shot. A bit better defense. And they have Formation Fighter and a bit more hit points. These guys are pretty solid in melee. And then we have archers, right? They have a spectral bow. These can shoot underwater. And that's pretty rare. There's not a lot of ranged underwater options. So this actually is pretty good, especially in like fort defense scenarios where a lot of times things get bottled up at the gate. You can be plinking away at people, and things like Storm don't work underwater, and things like Aerofend I don't believe work underwater. So a lot of the traditional archery counters don't actually work underwater. So that's also significant. But otherwise pretty similar stats. Not as good at defense, not as good at hit points. So you do also get sacreds. Now what I found is you get usually about like 20 sacreds over the course of 50 turns in Dom 10. So you're really looking at like half a sacred a turn, and you're only, unlike all these other things, which are going to be the same in all the fort configurations, these you are going to need a temple to have a chance to roll. And they're kind of cool. They have a higher damage sword. They have bad formation fighter, so I think you can only fit 2 per square, even though they're size 2. And yeah, they're sacred, so they're going to take your bless. I think those are the most noteworthy things about them. They have pretty high defense. I think they go berserk, if I recall, when blessed. I believe they have that attribute. So those things are kind of cool. But yeah, so you can get a fair number of these. I mean, not a tremendous amount, but I mean, it's like less than a temple trainer, right? So if you had like a temple trainer mage sitting there making 1 a turn, you're going to get less than 1 a turn in forts. You're going to get half of 1, if that, a turn in forts with the temple. So it's not a ton. They're more like special forces. However, you can, you know, especially if you get these guys buffed up, they take buffs well, right? Especially because I believe they do go berserk when blessed. So you can get these guys buffed up, send them into combat, and they'll do pretty okay, especially with a solid bless. You know, the nice thing about a bless too is you can fix things like resistances, so that, and a lot of times, you know, you can get protection up really high with normal spells and things like that, but a mage will plink through them if they don't have resistances. So if you're looking at really buffing up troops, I think that's probably the best way to use these guys, is have them as like very much special forces. Thing you have to be careful about, of course, is like if you want them to hold, they're obviously not going to hold if they go berserk. So you want to bless them at the right time. Yeah. Okay, so those are the normal troops. I guess, you know, we'll come back here and look at the normal. Oh, well, there's a few things. So we talked about the commander. We talked about the researcher. We didn't yet talk about this guy. This is the other free spawn commander you get, and he makes, or he's basically just a basic priest. And these guys are able to reanimate, and they do reanimate specters, right? So that's going to just bring you some of those. What's notable about all of these commanders, though, is that while the... so like this is a normal fort. You can see in this fort, we got E4s, which are our priests. We got researchers, and we got normal commanders. And from looking around, I couldn't really tell a major difference. Like we got plenty of researchers. Here we have a lab. We got a few researchers. Here we have a lab only. We only got 2. I couldn't tell any difference really from having a lab or a temple for the proc chance of the different types of commanders. In general, you should be able to get the researchers and the priests in any kind of fort. And furthermore, this number of about 400 in Dom 10 over the course of 50 turns is the same for any fort level. Some of the pop kill nations, if you have a better fort, you get better free spawn or more free spawn. Does not appear to be the case here. So if you don't care about getting the sacreds, which I think there's a pretty good case to not care about them, it's like they're kind of a luxury. You really only need palisades. Like, and this is pretty different than most other pop kill nations. Like, I think, like a lot of other nations, you're wanting to build a temple or what have you, and like get this up to level 2. I think with Therodos, you really just build palisades in all of your forts. I mean, in all of your provinces, and that's so much cheaper than having to like upgrade it to a level 2 or a level 3 fort and putting a lab and a temple there. Like Lemuria also has free spawn researchers. But for them, you need to build a lab to get the free spawn researchers. So it's a way, way higher, capital investment to get these things out. And like for Airmore, they also, like Therodos, they have sacred free spawn. However, you need to build temples to get the sacred free spawn. And for Airmore, it's a really big deal. For Therodos, I don't think the sacred free spawn is really what you're playing the nation around. Like, you'll get some, but you're not getting a ton. And we'll talk about kind of the national strengths. But in general, I think with Therodos, beginning of the game, you just put palisades everywhere. Right? That is your first goal. Get palisades up everywhere you can. Later, in my opinion, the main reason to upgrade palisades is siege strength. Like, to make it harder for people to take your stuff. But if you're winning battles, if you're not being a bitch, like if you're winning things on the field, you don't really care about like people sieging your forts as much because you'll be winning battles. So, and the other thing to make note about as we talk about these is these guys are not mindless. And that's why they have, morale scores. The thing, though, with that is that they're also able to have siege defense. Like, if we look at these forts here, you can see we've got a casual, 200-something siege defense. So if you anticipate an opponent's move, you can fill up a fort with ghosts, and he's not going to be able to damage the walls, palisade or no. So that's pretty spooky. Let's go ahead and look at the units again now. So... And by the way, I've got the sprite mod on, so these will all look a little different for you. But in our underwater fort, so in our cap, these are the units you're going to be able to get. For this guy, who's also really important, you can only get in coastal forts. So, and he's not amphibious. But these guys are all amphibious, and you can get them... Oh, no, wait, is this guy not? Oh, yeah, he's amphibious. These guys are all amphibious, and you can get them in your capital. So Melia, these are pretty interesting. They come in 3 varieties, and I would say they're all pretty good, but kind of distinct. The air one is kind of in some ways the worst. We'll talk about them in a minute, but the earth and water are really important. The Earth one, you can put an Earth gem on them, and then they can do summon Earth power, and then they can cast spells like Iron Warriors, and that's really important because with Iron Warriors, you're going to get your protection up really high. And the other thing is you can stack up to 3 of these in the same tile. If you take a larger bless, which I think is a decent idea, something to think about at least on this nation, you can only stack 2 per tile like that, but I feel like, honestly, you're usually only going to want 2, but stacking 3 can be really nice, because you're going to be able to layer buffs on top of these guys when they're thugging up, and it's going to be really strong. But, like, the Earths are especially good at this. They can do summon Earth Power, and then they can cast Earth Might, which is an area of effect 1 strength buff. They can do, if you put another gem on them, then they'll do summon Earth Power, Iron Warriors, then with that extra gem... on top of the one you use to cast Earth Power, you can do Legions of Steel, which if you put bracers on these guys means you can start getting really, really ridiculously high protection, like mid to high 30s, if you're putting decent armor on them. And then a Legion, a gauntlet of oh god, what are they called? What are they called, damn it? Bracer of Protection. Thank you. So, yeah. Earth ones, super important for a lot of these Earth buffs. They can also do Temper Flesh on themselves. The water ones are super important as well. These are your most important ones, the Earth and the water ones. The water ones can do a few things. One thing is, with the gem, they can cast Quickness, which is an area of effect 1 quickening spell, so they can fluff the whole tile of Melia with quickness. If you take Reinvigoration in your Bless, that can help mitigate some of the extra fatigue you're going to get from quickening. And this is going to give you the bonus attack and defense, which can be really nice. But most importantly is they can cast Moss Body. And both of your earth and water varieties are going to be able to cast Liquid Body or Temper Flesh. And so that means you get the physical resistance plus the Moss Body. We're talking about huge amounts of damage reduction at this point. It's pretty nice. It's pretty darn nice. One thing you do have to worry about a little bit with these guys, and it's almost worth thinking about taking in your Bless, is Berserker, because these guys can run from morale. Like, they don't have amazing morale, and thugging with not amazing morale commanders, especially if you're in more of like an endurance approach to thugging, it just isn't great. So you can either think about how you break into blood and put flesh eaters on them, or you can think about taking Berserk in your Bless. But point being, once you get Moss Body and then like Iron Warriors and then Liquid Body and Temper Flesh on your dudes, they are going to be so ridiculously hard to kill, especially if you have elemental resistances and some armor on them. If you put Quickness on them, especially if you have some Reinvigoration buffs and maybe a little bit of Reinvigoration gear, and then you put on some good weapons, you are potentially not going to need to worry about berserking as much, because like a tile full of 3 of these guys with decent weapons is going to be able to pick their way through a good number of like an enemy host. Like, they're going to be killing things at an alarming rate, like a bunch of brands and things like that. So these guys, they also have Awe, which is pretty nice to have on this chassis, and they have built-in recuperation, which is pretty nice for thugging. They also are going to reduce unrest, which is kind of cool. Kind of, make everybody relaxed and accepting of the fate of, basically the whole population of the countryside dying and becoming ghosts. So the other thing to note about water is there's a bunch of good underwater thug buffs. With water, basically you can get bonus defense, and you can get Ice Shield, which is basically like it's like Flying Shield, except it works underwater. So that's pretty good. These guys make pretty good thugs underwater, just by themselves. The air aren't as good. There's the things that I think you use the air for. One is just putting Mist Form on if you're not expecting really much magic damage. That can make them a pretty good thug. But perhaps the most important thing with air is just having them cast flight on themselves and going and messing with the enemy backline, trying to get in with the mage court. This is only relevant in land battles, though. But having like a very killy thug, so like perhaps you have three, imagine you have three of these guys, right? And you can get quickness laid on them, and then you give them 2 weapons each, and then you have them go and attack rear. They can make a mess of the back line pretty quickly. So that's something to consider. Of course, being in the back line with mages is dangerous if they've got any kind of evocation or damage spells they're casting at you. They will tear you up and a lot of times negate defense. So a lot of times you want to do this if you have resistances, and then maybe even try to get luck on them one way or another with items or something. So we talked about all of these paths. The other thing, of course, to consider is the base path they get, which is nature. And there's a few things you can do with that. One is you can put a gem on them and they can cast personal regen, all of them. So that's pretty important. The other thing is you can put a Thistle Mace on one of them, and with a gem they can cast Area of Effect 1 regeneration and therefore get it on the whole tile, which is pretty nice. And I think that's a pretty good use of a Thistle Mace, having one of these guys run around, because like a party of 3 of these is a reasonably high gem investment. You'll be able to make a lot of their items at a discount because you have a forge bonus, so we'll talk about that later. But even with the forge bonus, a squad of 3 of these guys with a reasonably full kit is a pretty major investment, and being able to get regen on them is going to be really, really nice. And a Thistle Mace is going to help with that on one of these. And they don't come in a nature random, so you're kind of just stuck with making use of them as is. So anyway, yeah. These guys are pretty sick. You can also do Enlarge with an extra gem, or your guy that you put a Thistle Mace on can just cast Enlarge. And I think that will get you a bonus. I think it's 30% more HP. I don't think that will get you above 20, which would be the threshold to jump up to 3 regen a turn. You're already at 2. I don't think it'll get you up to 3, but if you stack a Coral Sword on them, then you'll be up to 3 regen a turn. Coral Sword, by the way, is I think like very basic good gear for these guys. Definitely something to consider. All Nature also gives you Elemental Fortitude, which can be really good to drop to just get your resistances up to the next level. That can be really good. But yeah, basically it's like Enlarge, Personal Regen, and Elemental Fortitude. Those are the Nature Thug buffs. So these are things you can be looking to do with your Melia. They're also really good leaders. They can command undead, magic beings, what have you. And they've got good leadership value, so they're inspirational. And your ghosts do have morale penalties, so these guys are really good at leading ghosts. Next up, we have these guys, the Dactyl. They're master smiths. So what it means is basically you're going to have a bonus 1 path to forging. So like your death 1 is still going to be able to break you into higher death, and that you can make a skull staff even with only death 1, and then you'll be effectively death 3 for the purposes of forging. You'll be stuck there for a little bit unless you empower them up, or you get a lucky death 2 random, which is very, very low odds. But yeah, you can get fire randoms, so that gives you the water fire cross path, which is pretty rare in the game. Lets you summon green lions. These guys are going to be decent at sight searching, and yeah, you can potentially forge. You'll probably need some you'll need a lot of boosters, but you can do Staff of Elemental Mastery, either the fire water route or the air earth route. So those are things, but also, and perhaps the biggest deal about these guys is they're all Earth 2 at least, right? And some of them will even be Earth 3. And the Earth 2 just means you can do Strength of Giants, summon Earth Power, then Strength of Giants. And honestly, getting that spammed over your whole army is a really big deal. Legions of Steel, not as important because most of your ghosts don't have any armor for Legions of Steel to work on, but Strength of Giants is really good. And I would say it's like core to playing with the ghosts. Like And it's also a way this nation is kind of unique in that a lot of times, like, Lemuria isn't able to get Strength of Giant spammed out over all the ghosts. And it makes such a big difference for damage output. Like, a really, really big difference. You know, Airmore, there's not really many death nation, like pop kill nations that have easy access to Earth 2s. And this is one of the best, like, Strength of Giants is one of the best buffs for free spawn. Because you don't really care about it dying, and it's just going to go and kill, it's going to make them more killy. And a lot of times, like, I think that's one of the core things you have to solve for with Therodos is how do you kill hard targets or really elite troops? Because there's going to be a lot of troops that just aren't going to care about your ghosts at all. And getting Strength of Giants on them is one of the core ways to, like, deal with that. And that's probably one of the things these guys do the best. You know, they also have some important cross paths for doing, like, freezing mists. You can do sulfur haze even with the fire randoms and stuff. So these guys have a lot of different magic they can do. It's worth noting all the fire randoms, if you give them a fire in a jar, they can get up to fire 2, but just using that extra fire gem to do Phoenix power. The water ones, everybody can do. All your water mages can do water power underwater. These paths, by the way, are like, depending on what you take for your god, these may not actually be breaking you into much. Because, like, some of your heroes and stuff are going to be able to, like, have better paths for this. And a lot of the important, like, high-tier item forging, you really only need one person to be making, like, a Staff of Elemental Mastery or something. So, these are an option for doing that. Honestly, I think the biggest thing about them is that they're Earth 2. Okay, so that's them. Next up, we have the Hecatoride. And so they're all Nature 3, Water 2. And we'll talk about what that means. But they're going to come in a random. They can get an air random, a water random, an earth random, or a nature random. So the nature randoms are cool because Nature 4 is really high nature. It's going to mean with the Thistle Mace, it'll be Nature 5. That's pretty sick. In fact, the earth randoms are also going to be able to get you up to Nature 4 because you can put a gem on, do summon earth power, and then you'll be able to do... oh, no, you don't even need to do that. Yeah, you just can straight off cast Strength of Gaia, which gives you a bonus nature path. So, yeah, basically half of these dudes are going to be Nature 4. Right? There's going to be the ones that start with it and the ones that have to cast Strength of Gaia, which is sick, right? Like, that means Charm. That means huge nature buffs. All these can cast Foul Vapors. You can cast it, by the way, with Melia with a Thistle Mace, too. But yeah, it's huge, right? Mass Regen. That works on ghosts, by the way, because ghosts are not lifeless. There's just a ton of things you can do with these guys. The water randoms, Water 3 is not something to sneeze at. You can cast summon water power, and that's going to let you cast Liquefy, like drop Liquefy. The other thing you can cast with these guys is Bone Melter. It's like Alt 5. It's pretty easy to get to, and Alteration is something you're going to be wanting to run up pretty fast anyways. And you have pretty good research with this nation, but Bone Melter and Liquefy are some of the good ways to deal with, like, really elite troops. Yeah, these guys are no freaking joke. No joke. Yeah. Liquefy, super good. The other thing with Liquefy you can look to do is put on, like, a pin item. That will definitely help with Liquefying with Bone Melter. So yeah, the water ones, the other thing you can look at later in the game too is like all of the quickness spells, like Area of Effect quickness and things like that. So air ones here, I think the air ones are probably the worst. I'm thinking the only thing you would really be looking at with the air ones is maybe like Freezing Mist, which is not bad, but I think that's probably the main use case for air ones. Can't be cast underwater, so you're not going to be able to use water power to get up to it, so you actually would have to You would actually have to forge a water bracelet for them to do freezing mist, but that's something they could do. And they can also make amulets of the fish if for some reason you need to, get you don't really have underwater units that aren't amphibious. So I don't know. I think the air ones are probably the worst by a margin. But putting a water bracelet on them and have them slamming freezing mist can be pretty good. So that is these guys. So these are the main mages that you make out of your capital. You can also make these two, the Dactyl and the Hecatoride, they can only be made in your capital. The Melias you can make in all forts, right? All underwater forts and all coastal forts. This guy, who we're about to talk about, you can also make in coastal forts, but you cannot make in your underwater forts. He can't even swim. So he comes in a few varieties, and he's a pretty important part of this nation. Mainly because he has a forge bonus of 1. He also gives you a resource bonus. You can also get resource bonuses. So as your population dies down, it will affect how many resources you get. And to be able to get Melia, you need resources. They have a resource requirement. So if somehow the pop gets too low, you may need a couple of these guys to allow you to get a Melia every turn. So that's just something to consider. If you're playing a non-pop kill version, like you're playing Dom 1, these guys would help you get more troops and things like that. They also cause unrest. But the big thing is the forge bonus. That means you're normally with a dwarven hammer, a 5-gem item will cost 3 gems. This will make it cost 2 gems. So it's a pretty major, it's basically it's going to be a 33% reduction in cost, assuming you're using a dwarven hammer for items. And this is going to make your Melia pretty cheap to kit out. So definitely something to consider. And it makes something like having, if you can control Earthblood Deepwell, it's really nice because you can then spam out dwarven hammers, and then you can use these guys to make really cheap earth items. Like, I think controlling Earthblood Deepwell would be amazing as Therodos, right? Because you're going to be able to get Armor of the Knights, and then just a crappy little earth hat, and then bracers of protection, and then you can even use it to make like main gauches of pairing or whatever the item is that you think you want to put on them. Like, just make really cheap earth gear. And that's going to make your Melia pretty good thugs. Now, I don't want to like push you into over relying on Melia, because like I do not usually I like thugs. I love using thugs. I like super combatants. I like using super combatants. However, in my opinion, like especially at top end play, you do not want to over rely on thugs, because while thugs make it reasonably easy to kill troops, they can usually also reasonably easily be killed by mages. So, and then if you're over relying on thugs, then your opponents can just start taking all your thug items they get from you, and then use them however they see fit. So, that being said, having quite a few Melia running around with like very budget gear is pretty strong. In addition, these guys are going to be able to help you make Alquils really cheap in the beginning. Like, even just making them for 4 gems instead of 5 at the beginning of the game is pretty nice. And help get your research like really up and running, because these guys get crazy research, guys. And then later, of course, we'll get Lightless Lanterns, which these guys can make for 2 gems instead of 3, which is a kind of big deal. The water randoms is pretty nice because, like I was saying, being able to make coral swords, like these are really top-end items for Melia, because a lot of times they're going to have regen on them, and so that will get them up like a bonus extra what's going to give them way more hit points to chew through, so it's going to make them much more able to resist like the occasional big hit, and it's going to give them more regen. So like coral swords are super duper good on Melia, and these guys can make them for cheap. Frostbrands are also really good, and they can make those for cheap. So that's something. And then the other thing is, of course, the Earth randoms being Earth 2. There's not a ton of like Earth 2 gear you really need to forge. Like maybe, the Earth boots are pretty nice to be able to make. So that you can do some of the big Earth buffs. That's important. But like you only need one Earth random really for that. Honestly, the rest of these guys, the other thing you can do with water is you can make Shambler skins, right? And then I think the other ones, like the rest of these Earth 2, these are your combat mages. These are the guys you don't keep in the lab. You have them running around with your army, putting Strength of Giants on them. Casting Blade Wind, casting Destruction, doing Earth Meld, like all the Earth spells. These are like your non-lab rats. These are the guys running around. So, anyway, those are the mages, and you also have some pretenders you can get. And basically, well, we're gonna have to talk about the summons. I'll pull up Mod Inspector. All right, so I've got Therodos pulled up in Mod Inspector. If we look at the heroes we get, because I think you'll probably want to be taking Luck 3 like you normally want to take with most Pop Kill Nations. You get this one. This one you can get right at the beginning of the game. And it's basically, it's not very special, right? Because like these are the base paths you get. I'm trying to think even what's special at all about it. I don't have Worthy Heroes on. It's probably a little better with Worthy Heroes. We'll just turn that on real quick. I'll probably have to refresh the data. Okay, it casts personal luck each battle. I think that's the Worthy Hero bit. So yeah, maybe she gave her better armor or something. Maybe they gave her better armor too, but I don't know. Anyway, it's basically just like a cap only mage. It's not very special. Has really good leadership. I don't know what to say. But you also get you get 2 Telkines that you can get. And Telkines are pretty cool. They're shape-changing units in their normal form. They look like a big size 4 kind of Titan. And then they switch into a bear-headed form or a dog-headed form. I'm not really sure what kind of head this is. And they get bonus air and water paths. And they get bonus hit points, and they get fear. And these are very high path mages, as you can tell, right? So, like, Air 5 is ridiculously high. Like, it's the highest, which this guy has. This guy's only Air 4. But, like, Air 5 is, like, tippy top. Like, there's not units that come higher than Air 5. Like, I don't think there's an Air 6 unit in the game that you can get without wishing or something like that. Not that I can think of. Like, this is ridiculously high. All right, and Air 4 is really high, too. So, but, these only come at turn 25, right? So that's a bit of a zinger for you. And that makes a big difference, like, not only when you get it, but, like, if you get it. Because you're basically going to have way less of a window in the game to actually get it. But, like, these are some of the best heroes in the game. Importantly, they do not cast Malediction like Foul Vapors at the start of combat like your other Telkines do. And so with that, we'll go ahead and look at our summoned units. Here you can see this is a Telkine. You get them with this spell. It's a Conjuration 8 spell. It costs 70 water gems or 69 water gems. And yeah, it gets you one of these dudes. So because it costs water, one of the things you can be thinking about is trying to control Maelstrom. And that's going to give you, a lot of water gems, and you can use that to summon Telkines, which is pretty cool. They are pretty good thugs, right? So they get here's the randoms they get. They can be Fire 3, or Air 5, or Water 5, or Earth 4. Those are pretty huge, or Death 3. I would say all these randoms are really good. Probably Fire the least good, but it would be your highest Fire Mage on the nation. But yeah, like, the thing is, there's also a Pretender God you can get that's a Telkine, and by the time you get Conjuration 8, Foul Vapors is not really a thing. Like, everybody's probably going to have Serpent's Blessing by then. And if they're fighting you or neighboring you, they're going to be thinking about Serpent's Blessing, because you can just cast it with all your cap-only mages. So this thing isn't really a big deal. It's nice for thugging, just to like put it up and be like, you know, like if you're magic phasing these guys in, cloud trap piecing them in, it can be a kind of big deal. Sorry, there was a fly that was running around that was annoying me. I tried to kill it, I couldn't get it. But yeah, the nice thing about having it on like a super combatant chassis is that if you have a battle that's going to time out or go really long, it's going to potentially get the mage core. Like, not only is it going to proc before they can get Serpent's Blessing up, potentially, and do some damage there, but if the battle, like if he's timing out the battle, which is a lot of times how this goes, even armies with Serpent's Blessings on them, if they don't, especially if they don't have mass regen, are still going to get killed by Foul Vapors. So that's a thing you can do. They're also going to be killing population wherever they go. They've got the Reaper tag, so that's a thing. But yeah, they're a pretty cool thing you've got. For the other summons, you can get E4s and the Philosophers. We already talked about them. You can get Sparte. You have So Dragon Teeth. This actually is definitely worth noting. So, basically, you can use any of your Earth Mages. You spend 1 Earth Gem to get them up to Earth 2, and then an additional Earth Gem for each time you cast this. And you get 10 of these dudes, and these guys are sick. They have this like magic weapon, two-handed. I think, is this two-handed? Oh no, it's not. But it's a high damage spear. Like, they will knock the dog crap out of you with this spear. I guess it's a 16 damage thing, and a lot of times you'll put Strength of Giants on them. But yeah, it's a magic weapon. It's piercing, and it's a reasonably sturdy chassis. And they've got Formation Fighter. I don't know. These guys are hard to thug against. I played against Therodos. I think I was Hinam, and several Melkorts died to a bunch of these Sparte. But you just get a ton of them. Like, you get 10 of these dudes with 1 gem. So do not hesitate. And it's another nice thing about if you're controlling Earthblood Deepwell, you can be really liberal about spraying out So Dragon Teeth. It's a bit high in research. It's enchantment 6, but it is really strong, and it can totally swing a fight. Like, putting up like 6 or 7 of these casts at the front of your formation, and then after they're out, you drop like Fog Warriors or Mass Protection on them. Pretty good. You have Cur, which is a way to break into blood. Probably you have to basically Gift of Reason these guys. I think it's worth trying to do on this nation, putting them in some fort where you don't have Dominion or place and trying to get a blood economy going. You're never, of course, going to be a blood power. Like, you'll never be summoning really demons even, or probably even vampires, though you potentially could. The real reason to get a trickle of a blood economy going is for Flesh Eaters, which is, of course, that one-handed item that's going to make your guys go berserk. I think it's worth doing just for that, but it's very limited. You don't want a lot of these. You probably just want like 3 of them, 2 or 3 of them. Blood hunting, and that will give you enough to get some Flesh Eaters out. So it's worth considering doing that. You can also do that with like scouts or something, but you're not exactly going to be, swimming in gold playing Therodos. So this is a non-gold way to do that. You have Hounds of Twilight, which are fine. You have these guys, which are overpriced. You have Lamp Pads, which you can empower and get these magic paths. Kind of significant. Like, Death 2 is pretty high death access for you until you get Telkeens, but I don't know. Probably not worth it, but it's there. So let's go back to the game. Let's talk now more about strategy for this nation. Like, how does it play? We've already talked a bit about, I think it's like 1% pop kill, so it's not on the high end for pop kill, but with high Dominion score, 1% is plenty. Because it's going to be 1% per candle. You'll kill your population real fast. Forts have a threshold for how much it will kill. Like, here you can see we're on turn 90, because I've been hitting end turn a lot. But we're at 2,500. I think one thing about this is the higher level forts will have higher thresholds for how much population gets killed. So here you can see it went all the way down to 600. Here it went to 1,000. 380, and here it's at 1500. And here in our cap, I think it's even stays a bit higher. I'm not sure how many recruitment points. 64. So you'd still only be able to get 2 of these guys a turn, if that. Like not even 2, right? Because we're at a recruitment point. So it's, but you know, yeah, I don't know. If you took like order scales, you would have more recruitment points. So I don't know. It leaves you with a bit of population, which is kind of nice, but it's not very much. However, it does make the argument for getting these things forted up early. And potentially is another argument to maybe upgrade your fort. I don't really think it's worth upgrading a fort just to save 600 population. I would just probably let that population die. So that's a thing. But yeah, your forts will protect a certain amount of population, and they will protect more for the higher level forts. Yeah, these seem to be protecting right around 2,000. So it might be that this place got less than 1,000. I think that it's probably right around this much is how much the level 3 forts protect. Right around 2,000, and then I think it's right around 600 for the low level forts. And then here you can see we don't have any fort. We're all the way down to like 300 population. So I'm not exactly sure what the numbers on that are, but that will give you just a vague idea. So you're going to have a fair amount of pop kill. You're going to get higher spawn rates than I'm showing you here normally, because you will likely have death 3, and that will significantly affect your spawn rates. I think when you're playing Therodos, one thing you want to figure out very early is I think you take your starting Melia. So you'll start with a Melia in your army. You're going to make her a prophet, and it's kind of inefficient. Then you're going to make another Melia out of your cap. The Melia you make will lead your starting army. You also start with an E4, and the E4 is going to call ghosts. And your other guy, your prophet, is going to preach. And the reason is, like, we don't really want our prophet running around with our army if you're going like a pure free spawn route, because we really don't want our dominion to spread very quickly outside of our capital. Like, we don't want it to be getting a little bit of dominion everywhere. What we want, and this is the same for most all pop kill nations, is you want a lot of dominion in the specific provinces you're putting forts in, and as little of it elsewhere. Now, once you get your cap filled up with dominion, it will speed up the rate at which dominion bleeds into surrounding tiles. That is okay, right? That is okay, because we're going to want to fort up our cap circle pretty quickly with just palisades. And then we're actually going to want to start preaching in those palisades to get the fort up there. Now, when you put temples in those forts is a decision that you'll need to make. I wouldn't recommend really rushing into it. I think if anything, like that first profit you make is going to run around and get your dominion score up to 6 in all the forts you're making. So as soon as you get to 7, which is the highest you can get, preaching with a in a temple province with a holy 3, right? You can preach up to double your priest score plus 1 if there's a temple. So as soon as you get to dominion score 7 in your cap, move them to your next fort. Go ahead and start preaching. Once that gets up to 6, because you probably won't have a temple there, you go ahead and move to the next one. Now, if you have high dominion score, once you put a temple there, it will even go above that 6 or that 7 point, which is a good thing. And you'll get to decide when to put temples where. What you'll probably want to do is mostly focus on putting temples on one side of your empire. And you can do that just based on where the candles have spread. The general goal is you want to have more you want to have temples to get your dominion up in your forts, and you don't really care about despoiling enemy land. I wouldn't want to piss people off, but what you want to avoid is spreading your own dominion into your more distant lands that don't have your scales yet, or your dominion yet, right? So maybe if you're in a grid, and we'll probably do a sample playthrough, you'll probably want to build out more in one direction towards one shoreline, and put temples in that direction. And then maybe on the other side, you'll build out more slowly there, though I think you still want to get your your cap circle everywhere. What you'll achieve by doing this is you're going to get a lot of these guys, or a reasonably large number, right? And in Sloth and Magic Scales, they're going to be great researchers. You send them to your cap where you have a lab, and you research like crazy. So the other thing you're going to want to look to do in the reasonably early game is secure at least one coastal fort. And the other thing you're going to want to do is site search. Because you're going to be primarily like a gem-reliant nation. Now, we're already at 50 minutes. I think we'll go ahead and talk about pretender design and like talk about how you win the game potentially, because I think you'll have different ways of winning the game depending on which pretender you take. But here's a few. If you Attica has a pretty good video on Therodos. He's played this nation a lot more than me. I have never played them. I played against Therodos a few times. And you know, they can do a good number of things. Like they can do foul vapors, they can do grip of winter. You know, potentially, especially if they have a god with death, they can do rigor mortis. Like there's a good, they can do all the fatigue stuff is really good, but they can also do a ton of really good buffing. They have really high nature access, so they can really easily do mass regen. They can do the protection buffs, like natural protection. They should be able to do fog warriors reasonably easily. And when you start stacking some of these protection buffs on top of the etherealness of troops, and then doing the fatigue plays, you're going to have really strong armies. And you can potentially have a lot of armies. And like your undead are going to be very good at raiding, especially if there's no mage support or magic weapon troop support. So you'll have a lot of really good small, medium armies, and then you can also have really fierce big armies. This is an Awake Expander. If you take this Telkeen and you expand, and you can tinker around, like maybe you get like another Earth point and you get Reinvigoration 4, or you know, Reinvigoration 2. You can tinker around what you do with this, but if you do this build, basically you sit around and you need to research like Alt 2, so you can get Stone Skin before you send them out. It's actually kind of nice to get nature on this chassis. You can switch around which paths you get and pick up a bit of nature. It's nice to be able to have poison resistance on your like your sacred mages, so you don't have to worry about running them in with you know, with a Telkeen or something. They're just going to be automatically protected by the bless. But you're going to want to be researching to get Alt 2, and you're probably going to need it at a minimum some chest armor, though it's nice to have a hat too. And then you can let this guy go run into combat. With fear and putting up foul vapors at the beginning of combat, and then putting up stone skin on himself later, especially if you have nature path doing moss body. Underwater, you can do the water buffs, you can do mist form. There's a bunch of different things you can do. Skeletal body. This guy's able to expand pretty easily once you get those things, but he can't really expand like right out of the gate. And the problem not expanding right out of the gate is that's usually the most valuable turns to have an expander, because it allows you to get that, you know, particular border you want quickly. Like having a Titan that comes out turn 5, like it's not bad, it's nice, but it's not amazing. Because it's probably not going to dramatically change the outcome of expansion for you. But you'll have this guy around for your first war, and most people aren't going to want to mess with you. One thing we should also talk about is, like, for all of your Telkeens, they're going to be air mages. They'll be able to cloud trapeze. You cannot cloud trapeze from underwater. You can cloud trapeze to underwater, but you'll need to start off on land. So it's, again, another important thing about controlling land forts, thinking about where you're putting your air mages. Having your Telkeens in land forts is going to allow you to pounce underwater. Astral mages, though, are going to be able to teleport starting from underwater, like from your capital lab. So that's something else to think about, and it's something this guy's not going to be able to do. To use this guy to magic phase, you have to pre-position him to a land lab. And depending on how you're fighting and how that's set up, that may just not be, it's going to be a lot less practicable than like an astral teleport. But this is one guy. One of the nice things about this is you're getting all these resistances. It's pretty good. Another option you have is getting the Kraken. And I love the Kraken. Here you can get it with reinvigoration. You also could do fire shock resistance, and that's probably maybe a little bit better with a bit of reinvigoration. The thing about resistance is, though, especially on thugs, like, people love it. You can forge the resistance items, though. So it's like, if you know what you're going to need, and you're not going to need all the resistances every time. Like, a lot of times resistances are wasted, right? But, like, if you know you need a resistance, you can just make that resistance item for your thug. So, you know, I think you can go reinvigoration or you can go fire shock resistance. Either is fine. This is dormant, so he's going to be coming out helping you win your first war. It's high astral, high enough to cast wish, so you can wish for magical power and give yourself more paths. This guy's going to be able to pretty easily control Nexus if you go that way. He's going to be able to make golems. He's going to be able to control Earthblood Deepwell, and perhaps most importantly, he's got some really good paths for fighting water elementals. He can very easily be immune. He does personal regen. He does body ethereal. Very good against water elementals. And then he can do moss body on top of that. And then like iron skin too. All those things are going to make him actually immune to water elementals. Like he can kill 1 million of them, and he can magic phase. And one of the most important things, especially in underwater, is winning the first war. Because, like, you know, with this guy, you use it to wipe out an enemy army, and then you go and try to win the first war. And then you've got pretty obvious late game plays with this guy, like Nexus and Earthblood Deepwell, and then Wish, right? So, like, this guy is bringing a lot to the table. I think I would much prefer this over the Telkeen if I were to play. The Bless is less good, and you could figure out what you want to do. Farcaster's kind of nice for elemental magic in general, and you've got a fair number of elemental mages. So, like, we had mentioned some of the clouds, like Freezing Mist, Sulfur Haze. Being able to drop that farther is often really good because it means you can sometimes hit the mage core. But yeah, so Farcaster, I think, is a pretty decent Bless. You know, kind of funnily, Farcaster is usually not great on astral nations, but it's really nice on elemental nations. And so that scratches this itch here pretty good. And reinvigoration is pretty nice on mages too. So it's really nice on your thugs. Nice on your god too. The other thing Water 1 brings here is Quicken Self, which on the Kraken with all these weapons can be pretty amazing. So this is probably the build I would take, guys. Like, if I were going to play Therodos, I would probably do this. You're not going to have, like, a steaming, amazing expansion, right? But it's high Dominion. And, yeah, this is probably what we'll play in the test game. If you wanted to, though, you can just go, like, a Dormant. This is Dormant. You could go even Imprisoned and take even a more Hellish Bless. You probably want to up Dominion more than this. I don't know what I did here, but probably get lower this some and get this up to at least like 7. 4 is too low Dominion, I think, for Therodos. But yeah, this just gives you a ton of different things that you can put on your Bless. You could switch Farcaster out for more MR. That's pretty good for thugs. But yeah, you can switch this up, get whatever you want. Maybe you don't get quite as high of, like, maybe you get minor poison resistance. You know, maybe you don't get reinvigoration and you get, like, mountain survival, so your thugs can run around a bit better. Drop this down to 5. Like, there's all sorts of ways to free up points to get Dom 7 here. But importantly, being dormant, this guy's going to be able to come out. He's going to be able to cast Earthblood Deepwell. He's going to be able to teleport on top of armies. Like, by the way, your Kraken can teleport as well. And, you know, he can drop Foul Vapors. He can drop all sorts of things. This is, you know, he can do Power of the Spheres. This is a very, very scary monolith. You may also consider taking a bit higher Astral. It's going to make it easier if you want to use this guy to climb up into high Astral. It's going to make it a bit easier. In fact, I would probably recommend taking, like, Astral 6. Because then you can put a crystal coin on, and then you can do, like, Rings of Wizardry rather than Sorcery. It'd be kind of nice. So anyway, yeah, I think there's a pretty good argument for running this up. The problem is you won't be able to cast Earthblood Deepwell unless you're Earth 6, unless you can make, like, a Ring of Wizardry or something first. So depending on your priorities, there's a good reason with this nation to run Construction 6 to get Lightless Lanterns out. But, and if you do that, if you run that early, then you can also get that Ring of Wizardry made. The problem is you're not really going to probably have great ways to site search for Astral until your god comes out. And maybe you make a golem and you have him do probing. So, a bunch of things to balance here. But yeah, you can do something along this vein. You can also just take a straight up expander and try to be really big, like take an earth snake or the sea serpent. Those are both pretty good expanders. But I think this guy brings a lot more to the table. He's going to help you win your first war. He's going to be just immensely difficult for your opponent to kill. And with Astral 7, you don't really have to worry about magic duel and stuff too. You can actually, it's almost high enough where you can be magic dueling yourself, where you just drop in, be like, hey, what's up? I'm gonna do like 4 magic duels and then returning, And like put a ring of returning on him. You just have him do a bunch of magic duels and kill a bunch of Astral 2 mages. Though I think it's probably better only if you're killing Astral 1 mages. Because I think Astral 2s, there's a small chance they can tie you and you die. You could also take them all the way up to Astral 8. And I don't think you want to mess too much with the scales here. This would probably, to get up to Astral 8, you're probably going to have to get rid of some of these, though. Or you'd have to cut down Earth some. The thing is that these paths are going to be really important for fighting water elementals. Like... freezing. Oh, the other thing is Breath of the Winter is really nice for fighting water elementals, but personal regen and this, it's just so important, especially in the magic phase. Like, the thing is, Moss Body and casting regen is something you can do in the normal phase really easily. Like, you have all sorts of mages who can fluff him for this, right? But if you're teleporting in, which a lot of times, like, the decisive move that you're going to make, that's going to like make or break the whole thing, is going to happen in the magic phase with your Kraken. So just being able to do this reliably in the magic phase is a pretty big deal. But if you're running up construction and you have really fast research, you might just have a Ring of Regen available, which means the nature isn't that important. And honestly, with regen and like enough defense, like if you're stacking defense super high, you can tank through water elementals okay. So anyway. How do you win the game, Miss Therodos? I mean, honestly, if you get all of the underwater system forted, and you're gonna have really good research, and you're running around, like, I think the thing is, all of your medium armies, which have like over 100 troops and mage commitment, you need to be thinking about how you're going to kill super combatants and thugs. And the answer there, a lot of times, I think, is Bone Melter, right? So you're going to need at least 1 cap-only mage on advance and cast spells with each of those armies. And ideally with some pin gear on them, too, right? But you can have a lot of medium armies, which are going to have a lot of buffs on them, which are going to be very difficult for the opponent to field, or, like, to kill, right? So I think the way to think about winning the game is first, like, taking over the whole underwater system on the map, getting it forted up. Right? Once you've done that, then you field a lot of little, medium, small armies that are going to be very difficult for the opponent to kill, and you're just going to kind of overwhelm them with more little medium armies than they can deal with. And then you're going to have a few really big doom stacks, like maybe only a couple, like 2 or 3. 1 to 3, right? And those ones are going to have way more mage support, right? They're going to have Strength of Giants on all the troops. You're going to have anti-magic up, which... casting anti-magic is not going to be easy. You're probably going to need a golem, so you need to be thinking about that Earth Astral cross path. But you're going to have Fog Warriors up. You're going to have Fatigue plays coming down. Doing Fatigue plays also not super easy. But this gets into like, how do you break into death? Rings of Wizardry are going to be really important because you're going to want to get like either your Telkines, or you're going to be getting your Dactyls or whatever, the death randoms that you can recruit that have the Mastersmith bonus. You get them a Skull Staff, you get them a Ring of Wizardry. Maybe you even have to put on a Ring of Sorcery, and that's going to give you a cumulative bonus of +4, including the Mastersmith, and that's going to let you make a Skull Face. Right? But climbing up death, getting access to Rigor Mortis is absolutely critical for your Doom stacks. And your Doom stacks, you're going to be running around doing Fatigue plays, dropping Strength of Giants on all your troops, doing mass regen, doing fog warriors, and then you're going to have multiple mages that are going to be capable of killing super combatants with Bone Melter. You're going to have your death mages there on advancing cast with Drain Life. You're going to have some kitted out Melia thugs who are like very budget gear. Here we're not filling out all the slots. We're just giving them weapons. And we're having them cast quicken. We're making sure they get quickness on them, and they're running into like blender stuff as part of an army with those weapons they have. But that's the big thing to watch out for these Doom stacks, is how you don't get countered by like a single super combatant. And there's a few ways to deal with it, like I mentioned, but that's I think how you kind of win with armies. How you win economically is just producing a shit ton of ghosts, site searching well, and then thinking about what globals you control. We mentioned Earthblood Deepwell is really, really good for allowing you to get out a lot of Melia thugs and a lot of gear. It can be really nice. In addition, what you can do with your Earth Gems is you can do Wizard Towers places, which can be really good for kind of late game grindy wars. The other thing, of course, is Nexus is potentially game-winning. Nexus is going to be a bit difficult for you to control because you don't have easy access to astral site searching, though. So having this guy come out dormant, especially if your research is really good and you can get, or you find some indie mages that are astral, getting that astral site searching going can be really good. I think that's it, guys, for this guide. Hopefully this is check out Attica's video too. It's pretty good on Therodos. And we'll do a single player game and just expand with them for a bit, I think. So we'll see you then. Take care.